Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Who'll be speaking for Y2 today? Do you know?
We actually have a couple of people. So Danny, Nick, and Kyrene. Kyrene most likely will be doing the presentation.
Okay. I'll just turn it over to her, and she can kind of walk through her team to do the presentation then. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. We're about 1 minute out. Okay. My clock indicates we have 5:30. Morgan, are we recording?
Yep, we're recording, Mayor.
Okay. Council, looks like we're ready to get started. I think I see everybody there. So let's welcome everybody out. We appreciate you joining us on this Tuesday night. I want to recognize we have Councilmember Burrell, Councilmember Paul, Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Wilson, and Councilmember Saxton joining us today. Let me, if I could, I'd like to just read our statement. As of today, the report I sent you indicated that Roy City has had 3,637 cases ever since the pandemic started a few months ago. In the last 14 days, we've registered at least 111 active cases in the city. As a result of that, I, Mayor Robert Dando, in accordance with Utah Code Section 52-3-2074, have determined that conducting a meeting in the Roy City Council chambers presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who would be present at the City Council chambers. And basis of this determination is due to the infectious nature of the potentially dangerous health effect of contracting the COVID-19 virus. There is not sufficient space in the council chambers to provide appropriate safe physical distancing for the safety of individuals who would attend. Accordingly, this date, which is February 16th, 2021, will be held electronically without an anchor location. So we appreciate you all joining us. Let's see if we can work through this. We did ask Councilmember Burrell if she would go ahead and lead us in a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Jan?
Please join me in a moment of silence. Appeal to the supreme being of your choice to guide us through these proceedings. Thank you. Joe, do you have your flag up? Or
I do.
If not, thank you. We'll use that too. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Jan, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Council, we have some consent items, specifically the approval of the December 15th, 2020 and the January 19th, 2021 City Council meetings, as well as the December 15th, 2020 work session minutes. Council, any comments or questions about that?
Make a motion, we approve the consent items.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have Joe give us a motion, Jan give us a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Perfect, thank you. Okay, we do have a presentation, and I believe Kyrene is going to provide that presentation. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to your team. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mayor. And I will go ahead and share my screen here so that everyone can review our survey results. We're excited to share the results of the resident survey with you. So I guess I will just sort of kick things off here, and then my colleague Danny Kauser is also going to help me present some of the results. So Danny, are you on the line and unmuted also?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Just wanted to make sure. I can't see everyone on the screen at the same time. So we're going to just dive in here, and I'm going to have Danny just tell me when to skip ahead slides. But we conducted this survey of Roy City residents. We're excited to share the findings with you.
Yes, we are. We had some really interesting results. So we'll just start walking through these. And the first thing we wanted to talk about that popped out with our data is that most residents view economic development as the top priority for Roy. We gave them a battery of options for what they wanted to say is the priority, and economic development jumped right up to the top. The second thing is that current evaluations of downtown reveal that it's not frequently used, that's referring to downtown, except for shopping and eating out. And many residents express a desire to update downtown Roy with more attractions. But generally, they feel that there's already sufficient housing available for people of all walks of life in the city already. And again, that emphasis on development is really strong there. We do have a slim majority of residents that support mixed-use development in downtown Roy. However, that said, there's a clear preference that Roy focus primarily on commercial development. And the last thing we really want to focus on is we used a conjoint experiment, which we'll explain later. But this is to test various dimensions of mixed-use development. And we found that residents' preference regarding the proposed mixed use are based primarily on building height limitations, as well as the atmosphere of the development. And again, we'll dive into all of these, but those are kind of the 5 main things we want to talk through. And here is some of our favorite parts, but might be a bit boring for you guys. This is the survey methodology. Just wanted to be transparent with what we did, as well as to explain the statistical significance that we can glean from the results. So the first thing we want to talk about is we had 814 residents that responded to this survey, and they were all within Roy City boundaries, and residents were randomly selected to participate, and they were given those survey invitations via email, and we also had a small address-based sample of downtown business owners in Roy. However, that sample is too low to have statistical significance. So this is going to be all the results that we're going to be showing are from that 814 resident sample. The next thing we want to talk about too is on this right-hand side, you can see we geocoded where all the respondents were in the city, and we have a pretty even split throughout the different sections of the city, with sample sizes ranging from 112 and 161. We also took this data and we weighted them to reflect the population statistics from the US Census, as well as precinct spread from the voter file. But we did this weighting to ensure that the sample is representative of the voting population of the city as a whole, and we weighted to demographics such as age, race, gender, homeownership, and voting precincts. And this survey was done online, conducted in January of this year, and the margin of error we got was 3.4 percentage points. So just something to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the data. First thing we want to talk about is just the health of the city, the perceptions that Roy citizens have of the city and the downtown area specifically. And honestly, this is really, really good news. We're excited to share good news, and this is particularly good. Satisfaction overall is really high. And we see that a vast majority of residents, about 81%, say that Roy is headed in the right direction, and there's only 19% who say it's in the wrong direction. 37% of residents in Roy say that it's better than it was 5 years ago, and 35% say it's about the same, with again only 19% saying it's worse off. And most residents would recommend Roy to friends and family as a good place to live. And those are all really, really good indicators that everyone in the city is doing a great job and that Roy is handling the growth that Utah's seeing really, really well. We also asked residents specific questions about the current environment of downtown, as well as what they would want to see in Roy downtown. And economic development is the issue that came up strongest. So we asked these residents, which of the following in this list do you consider to be the most important issues facing Roy today? And we see 29% of residents claimed economic development to be the most important issue, with housing affordability, maintaining neighborhoods closely behind, and then crime and public safety and transportation were the least. We also had another category just to make sure we didn't miss anything too important. That received about 7% of respondents indicated that, and they include incidences that just aren't as weighty as the others. And when we looked at this economic development and housing affordability questions, we actually saw this really strong underlying trend that homeownership is actually driving a lot of what people are choosing. So you can see that on this housing affordability side on the bottom left-hand corner of the graph, the majority of people who claim that housing affordability is the main issue are currently renting a home, or they're living with parents and relatives rent-free. But we see that homeowners, there's only about 13% of homeowners that say that housing affordability is the main issue. And the next issue we'll look at is that economic development, where, thank you, Kyrene. Those who own a home, there's 33% of them that claim that economic development is the biggest issue, and then only 17% and 23% from those who rent or are living with parents. We also asked residents, if they're thinking about the availability of affordable housing in Roy, if they thought there was too much, the right amount, or too little. And we had 40% indicate that they believe there's too little affordable housing in Roy right now. 29% said about the right amount. Only 10% said there was too much, and we have a 21% of the population that were ambivalent that claimed they don't currently know if there's enough or not enough affordable housing. And we looked at this issue as well, broken out by this homeownership versus renter versus living with parents, and we see something really interesting. So on the left-hand side, we see that those who are renting or live with their parents very, very strongly believe that there is too little affordable housing in Roy. But homeowners, there's only 34% of them that say there's too little. Homeowners, have a slight advantage in that the right amount section. But another very interesting data point is on the right side in this don't know category. People who own a home or are currently living with their parents are way more likely to not know what the housing situation is in Roy. And we thought that was something very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a lot we want to talk about on this slide. We asked all the residents, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements about Roy? And we just kind of want to talk through some of these interesting findings. But overall, this is just their evaluation of downtown Roy. This top part of the chart is, I would like to see downtown Roy updated with more attractions. And we see that there is almost 80% of residents who somewhat agree or strongly agree that they want to see Roy updated with more attractions. The vast majority, clearly stronger agreement there than any other category we see, with only 8% either somewhat or strongly disagreeing. The next kind of bigger data point we wanted to talk about is that Roy has all kinds of businesses that I want to have. This is about split 50-50, with 38% somewhat or strongly agreeing and 48% disagreeing, with a small 14% kind of ambivalent portion of the population. So clearly there is some split there about whether or not Roy has the types of businesses they want to have. And at the very bottom, we see that residents rate this statement, that I think downtown Roy as a destination in the city. And that has very strong disagreement. So we see 30% strongly disagree with 28% somewhat disagreeing. And combined, both strongly agree and somewhat agree is only 15%. So there is definitely a lack there in the residents' eyes. And the last thing we wanted to point out on this slide is this second to last bar, which asks residents to state whether they agree or disagree with the following statement. That's, I like living in Roy because of the businesses and job opportunities that are growing here. The big data point we want to talk about is that 39%. That there's just a lot of ambivalence about Roy having good businesses and good job opportunities. That 39% is a lot higher than all of the other questions in that neither agree nor disagree section. And I think overall a trend we see here is that people are very happy with Roy. They want downtown to be updated, but they're not living in Roy for those job opportunities or because of businesses that are there. Anything you would add, Kyrene?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. I think, like you highlighted, the quality of life in the city is really high. Residents were really satisfied. That said, there's a clear desire for newer or updated amenities in the business sector specifically. And those businesses and job opportunities aren't what's driving satisfaction with the city right now.
Great. And the next thing that we talked about was we gave residents a chance to look at the different businesses or amenities that they would like to see developed in downtown Roy. And I do want to mention that this question, we allowed them to select every single option out of dining options, entertainment, retail stores, etc. But a lot of residents only selected a few, and resident preferences are very, very strong for wanting new businesses in the dining sector, the entertainment sector, and the retail sector. And those three are the three that residents really care about, and everything else kind of just drops off in this very long tail here, where open spaces and parks has some support, but very significantly less. Yeah, we can head on, Kyrene.
Yeah, I will just note that it's pretty clear that residents think of downtown as the commercial center of the city, and that is the type of demand that they're looking for are the types of amenities and businesses that would make downtown a more desirable attraction for current residents, not necessarily for visitors. So hotels and lodging or that type of hospitality doesn't necessarily get a lot of love there. So.
Great. And also we asked residents about the frequency of activities that they're doing downtown. We first of all defined what that downtown area looks like. And then we asked them, when they're considering downtown Roy, how often do you or your family members visit for each of the following activities? And what we see is shopping and eating at restaurants jumped up right up to the top, as well as visiting commercial or offices or businesses is kind of right in the middle. But shopping and restaurants were dominantly what people are using downtown for. But if we think about this question in context of the last question, a few questions we've asked, is that residents are using Roy to go shopping and eating, but they're rating the shopping options and the eating options right now as really low. They don't really like the options there, but that's what they use it for. Another aspect we want to look at, and this kind of reiterates what I was just saying, is we asked residents just to rate the following aspects of downtown Roy. And we want our eyes to jump down to those last two options, and there's retail and shopping, as well as activities and entertainment. Both are the lowest rated options, with retail and shopping options having 62% of residents indicating that it needs improvement, and then activities and entertainment has 71% of respondents saying it needs improvement. The parking, however, in Roy is rated really, really high. There are 48% of respondents who say that it's either good or excellent. The atmosphere as well as walkability are kind of that second tier rating in Roy, but the retail and activities kind of section were the two main data points that we want to talk about here. Kyrene, do you want to jump in and talk about the mixed use development?
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about the mixed use ordinance proposal specifically, we wanted to ask residents about a few different aspects of this and ask some questions in a variety of ways to see if we can't tease out what's driving residents' preferences around the type of development they would be interested in seeing in downtown Roy. There's a pretty clear sentiment that residents are happy with the city overall, but they're not currently tied to what downtown looks like. There's no sense of identity there or anything that's really driving the status quo as the current sticking point. So interesting to look at some of these things that might shift preferences or decision makers in other directions. So we asked residents if downtown were to pursue a mixed use development ordinance, or if the city were to pursue a mixed use development ordinance for downtown Roy that could include commercial and residential space, would they support or oppose that proposal? And we have 52% of residents total who say they would at least somewhat support that idea. 21% neither support nor oppose, with just 26% total opposing the idea. We also asked residents why they would support or oppose a mixed use ordinance in the city, and pulled out just a couple verbatim comments here. So these were just open-ended responses from residents in their own words. But the first comment here in support, and this was pretty illustrative of the comments we saw overall, but the theme that Roy is running out of space, we need more retail and housing options. And then the case study of the Junction in Ogden with some entertainment attractions, movie theater, restaurants, great parking availability. That's something residents do really want to hold on to. And then condos above. So if we are going to incorporate residential, let's make sure it's not on the street level, but above that commercial space. So we're getting the most bang for our buck. That was sort of the supportive use case that residents pointed to as a success story. Some of the reasons residents might oppose a mixed use ordinance: high-rise apartments detract from the open, inviting feel of our city, can attract residents that are maybe decreasing quality of life, increased traffic and gridlock. So a lot of these things that residents are pointing to as potential drawbacks focus on the growing pains that could come with making downtown more of an attraction or increasing the draw for new residents. And then building next to a road, we're causing a tunnel feel. So getting rid of some of the open feeling that we have on wide city streets with lower building height limits, that's something that residents are wary of. And then the last statement here, we don't want to end up like Clearfield, and we don't live in Salt Lake City for a reason. So pretty strong opposition to some of those case studies in what density could look like. We looked at this question by zone of the city as well. So if you'll recall the map that we showed on that one of the first couple slides, where we divided residents into these 4 quadrants, we wanted to see if there was a geographic pattern to responses and specifically to support for a mixed use ordinance. And we actually find that there are only negligible differences across these sections of the city. So no statistically significant variations in support or opposition based on proximity to downtown or other location in the city, which I think is interesting to note. A similar picture here when we asked residents about their feelings on mixed use or on multi-unit housing, so multi-story, multi-unit housing in downtown Roy. This time we have 42% of residents, 41% of residents who say that they would support mixed use or multi-story, multi-unit housing in downtown Roy, and 42%, so pretty evenly divided, who say they would oppose multi-unit housing. And this is something that I think we're pretty used to seeing at this point. The idea of high-rise apartments and increased high-density housing is something that's become a bit of a trigger word for residents along the Wasatch Front especially. And so when we asked residents why they would support or oppose that type of housing development, residents who supported offered comments along these lines, and this was one in particular. Downtown Ogden's mixed use space by the Megaplex looks great and is improving and growing the area. We can be successful as well with the right design. So multi-family or multi-unit housing doesn't have to be a draw or a drain on the community. It can be done well, and if it's done well, it can really be a bolster. On the other side of the coin here, residents who were opposed to multifamily housing in downtown Roy said that the infrastructure really can't handle it. So it was interesting that that was less of a complaint about the type of housing or potential influx of residents on the surface level, but really focused on, can the city really afford to increase the capacity for residents before investing in infrastructure? That was an interesting theme that stood out for those residents who opposed. So focus on infrastructure and making sure that things are done right. I think the comments in support and opposition were really in sync there. So a difference of opinion maybe landing on other sides of the issue, but the core concerns about having multifamily housing well thought out and executed well, I think shine through on both sides there, regardless of the ultimate decision or opinion. I do think it's worth noting that our strong opposition category on this particular question is nearly double our strong support category. So if the city were pursuing residential development only and sort of foregoing commercial development at the expense of multi-story, multi-unit housing, that would be likely to face an uphill battle from residents and in the public opinion space. Once again, we looked at this question broken out by quadrant of the city per our initial map. And again, really no statistically significant differences here due to sample sizes within each of those quarter groups. So really consistent opinions throughout the city. Sometimes it's nice to see a little bit of homogeneity in terms of public opinion, regardless of geographic location. And this is one of those cases where we do have some pretty consistent thoughts and preferences, regardless of where residents live. We asked residents, when thinking about the future of downtown Roy specifically, what's the most important consideration and what is the least important consideration to them? Economic development, again, here jumps out at the top of the list of for residents' concerns. So 35% of residents point to economic development as the most important consideration when we're thinking about what downtown Roy could look like in the future. And then 20%, or 1 in 5, suggested that maintaining the look and feel of our neighborhoods was the most important consideration. So focusing that economic development and that commercial development specifically in the downtown area allows us to preserve community and residential neighborhood quality in ways that I think I was a little bit surprised to see residents really resonate with here. And then the least important consideration on this slide, 51% of residents, which it's rare to see a majority on a question like this, but 51% of residents point to keeping downtown Roy as is as the least important consideration. So residents really aren't worried about preserving that status quo. They're very interested in economic development, new amenities, more attractive business and dining options, and making this part of the city more of a destination. Again, looking at the issue a little bit of a different way, we asked residents how they would prefer to see the development in downtown divided between residential and commercial development. So the distribution you're seeing on the screen here ranges from 100% residential development, in other words, no commercial development at all, to an even mix of residential and commercial, or a 50-50 split, to 100% commercial development with no residential at all. And if you look at this, I think it's interesting that we have a few peaks in this distribution. So we've got a good portion of residents who say they'd be interested in seeing that 50-50 split of residential and commercial development downtown. And we have a large cluster of residents who would be interested in seeing some residential development, but with a shift or a focus towards commercial development. And then again, another peak on the far side of the chart here, looking at commercial development exclusively. There are a good portion of residents who would be most interested in seeing commercial development with no additional residential there. So very few residents on that residential preference side of the spectrum, but a good sort of cluster that are interested in seeing some balance with a favor towards commercial development. And so looking at the conjoint experiment we designed, and Danny alluded to this a little bit earlier, I'm going to talk through some of the science behind it before I get to the results, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I apologize if you can hear a barking dog in the background. It's nearly dinner time. So starting off here, we want to set the table with acknowledging that there are various aspects of what downtown development could look like. And it's difficult to ask residents to grapple with all of these different issues that are addressed in a mixed use ordinance. So when we're looking at varying aspects for building height requirements, where and how the parking is located, how far back the buildings are from the street surface, all of these are really complex, nuanced policy questions that residents aren't necessarily particularly well equipped to answer. What public opinion is best at is expressing a preference or a priority between two, or a simple set of options. So what we did here was try to design an experiment that facilitated that simple choice, and it sort of gamifies the process as well. So rather than asking residents to weigh all of these various considerations, we present them with two complete packages that vary the aspects that we're presenting. So the features that were included in this experimental design were building appearance, so how far back the storefronts were from the sidewalk and road surface, less than 20 feet or at least 20 feet from that road surface. Building height, so we included buildings up to 3 stories or no more than 40 feet, buildings up to 5 stories or no more than 60 feet, or buildings up to 7 stories and no more than 80 feet. I will note that we included both the approximation of the number of stories in each of these building heights, as well as the height in feet, because there's a little bit of uncertainty, and focus grouping this internally led us to believe that most residents probably don't know offhand the difference between a 40-foot and a 60-foot building, or a 60-foot and an 80-foot building. So trying to give those story approximations as well to give a sense of the variance in height for each of these limitations or requirements. Varying uses for the developments. So apartments or condominiums above street level commercial spaces would be our mixed use description. Street level residential space for townhomes, condominiums, or apartments, or commercial space only with no residential space were our variants there. And then parking, either parking garages in addition to on-site parking lots or on-site parking lots only. And then atmosphere would include new open space and or parks, walkable plazas and courtyards incorporated into new developments, or no new open space at all. So compiling a combination of these features and just presenting respondents with an A, B, or option 1 or option 2 choice set, the question looked a little bit like this. So imagine for just a moment that a mixed-use development is going to be built in downtown Roy. You need to decide which of the following 2 different developments you would prefer to be built in your community. And then we offered these 2 descriptions that sort of succinctly consolidate some of those options that we showed on the previous screen. So this is just what that question could have looked like for residents, and they were asked to choose either option 1 or option 2. Each resident who responded to the survey repeated this exercise a total of 5 times. And in the aggregate, we were able to really leverage statistical power with each of the conditions and sort of feature sets that were included in driving this decision, or what really predicted preference from one option to the next. So now the results of this experiment, what we find ultimately is that building height and the atmosphere of a development are really the driving factors for residents' consideration. So the appearance of the building, so how far back it is from the street level, isn't something that was a major factor for residents' considerations between options. The uses for those buildings was actually even sort of secondary to building height and the atmosphere included. And then parking was really a non-issue for residents. So we know that they're already pretty satisfied with the available parking, making sure that we include either parking garages or don't limit the on-site parking that already exists. Neither of those was a significant predictor of support of one option over the other. Height requirements, however, had a strong, significant predictive effect, and atmosphere, so whether there was new open space incorporated or whether that new development included walkable features such as a plaza or courtyard was strongly predictive of preference from one option to the next. Looking at each of the individual feature levels in each of these categories, again, the preference for appearance or how far back the building is from the street was pretty negligible. Our usage for the buildings had a significant effect here. So what's really important to note is that street level residential space was a detractor in choice selection. So if we're incorporating residential space, the mixed use approach where residential is above commercial space is definitely preferable. And then commercial space only had the strongest positive predictive feature. So keeping that focus on commercial development has been pretty consistent throughout the survey. And then the building height requirements is interesting. And really what we see here is just a preference for shorter buildings. So I think really in line with the comments that we pulled out earlier in the survey, residents are worried about having a downtown that feels like downtown Salt Lake City. That's not where they want to live. That's not where they chose to live. And so ensuring that we're avoiding that sort of high-rise towering atmosphere is pretty important to residents' decisions. And so shorter buildings are preferable. Parking, again, really a non-issue here. But then when we get to the atmosphere, I thought it was fascinating to see how much of a factor that really was. So again, incorporating walkable plazas and courtyards really carries a lot of the weight as to what creates an appealing option for development in a downtown area. Incorporating no new open space, but pursuing some of these other features actually has a really negative effect on residents' opinions and their appetite for this type of development if we're not making it a more pedestrian-friendly atmosphere. So looking at a couple of these, and I apologize that these labels are sort of running off the screen. So I will just hover for now and see if I can get that to show up, or maybe I'll have Danny chime in and tell me what those numbers actually are because it's just advancing when I try to click. So we compared some of these combinations overall to see whether residents were likely to choose the status quo for current zoning and development requirements. And we actually find that 2/3 of residents, or roughly 2/3 of residents, don't find that particular description appealing when given an opposing choice. So yeah, 2 out of 3 residents do not prefer a development that has the sort of current zoning requirement and development standards for downtown, which was interesting to me. Again, really no love lost for the current downtown. Residents are really eager to see some sort of change. When we look at the hypothetical development package that was the most appealing to residents, the biggest driving features would be commercial space only, buildings up to 3 stories or no more than 40 feet, and then walkable plazas and courtyards incorporated into those developments. Again, making it a pedestrian-friendly space is really key.
And those numbers are split 60-40, by the way, on the hypothetical, and then 63 and 37 on the current.
Perfect. Thank you, Danny. And then looking at sort of the varying cores and the specific mixed-use ordinance proposals for cores A and B in the downtown area, we find that the strongest variant and is also one of the biggest predictors of residents' support or appetite for that type of development. So in core A, where the building height requirement would be up to 7 stories or no more than 80 feet, we have just under half of residents who say that that's appealing. I believe that was 48%.
That is correct.
And then in our core B, where we have a slightly lower building height requirement, that 60-foot limit, residents are split 56-44. Is that correct? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
I can
it is.
math. All right. So we have a majority of residents who approve of that sort of core B 60-foot building height. Again, as long as we have that walkable plaza courtyard development, some level of pedestrian friendliness, creating an atmosphere that feels like a real downtown is one of those driving factors. But mixed use space with residential, above street level commercial is something that is appealing to residents if executed well. And I think that's worth highlighting here. I'll also note that we didn't present residents with this map of where the different types of development would be located. So there is also a possibility to sort of bring residents along for that core A proposal, if that's something that the city is interested in pursuing, that, you know, having that building height and sort of contextualizing the building height requirements for that area is not outside the realm of possibility. Right now, we're essentially at a coin toss for support and opposition of that particular area. So certainly contextualizing and ensuring that residents know where the boundaries of that type of development are, I think presents some opportunities here. And that is really the crux of the survey. We have just a couple slides briefly giving an overview of the demographics of our sample. Again, these have been weighted to ensure that they're reflective of the population of the city as a whole. The majority of our residents are married. Our median age for survey respondents was 51 years old. We're a little bit skewed towards female respondents, but 54-46 split there, primarily white or Caucasian respondents. A pretty good age distribution overall, and our length of residence in Roy is also pretty well distributed. So that's nice to see as well. We have a good proportion of residents who have been here for 10 or fewer years, and a good proportion of residents who have been here 30, 40 years or more. So it's nice to see a response rate that is reflective of that broad demographic base. Most of our residents are employed full-time, and as we mentioned earlier, 85% own or are buying their own home. So that has some pretty strong implications for perceptions of the housing market in the city and that level of demand. And that, oh, and one more slide here. So education, pretty well distributed. 37% of residents have some college education, 30% are college graduates. Our primary household occupancy rating is 2. Our average was roughly 2.5, 2.6 there. So pretty reflective of the underlying population again, and well distributed across income categories as well. That's our last slide. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have based on what we've seen here. I know that was sort of a whirlwind tour of all of the data we've collected. So happy to follow up to any questions after this presentation or after this meeting as well.
Okay, Council, you've got a rundown. Obviously, you've looked at the raw data. Now we have basically the charts. Any questions you might have for our presenters?
I just had a comment. I find it interesting, and I think this is one of the things we see and the things we've done in Roy like this. We have 814 people that responded out of 6,000 surveys that went out. As much as we've talked about it, we got it out there to get people to get in and get on it. You know, we had the same thing when we had the Focus Roy study. All these different things, we get very minimal input or follow through when it comes to this. And to that I say, you know, I would have liked to have seen a question in there. Do you think your elected officials are doing a good job? Because part of being an elected official is knowing the people and knowing who you represent and how to represent them. Because with 814 responses back, I don't know that I could, you know, hang the whole city on 814 people. I hope that we've got out, we've talked to people, we've done our due diligence as council members on top of the wonderful work Y2K has done. I appreciate their efforts. Great survey. Yeah, definitely interesting.
Thank you, Councilman. And I will note that despite what might seem a little bit discouraging, having, you know, we sent out so many invitations, that's actually a pretty good response rate for industry standards. So we're pretty used to rejection in the survey research industry. So I appreciate your kind words, as well as, yeah, that sort of reflective look on the methodology.
No, I know
the
it's
response
tough.
rate we got, and we're confident that it represents, yeah, that broad base of the population of residents due to the sampling procedure that was used to select those residents to participate. That said, there's always more that can be done. There's always more outreach to do, and And I think it's commendable that you as elected officials are interested in hearing more from your residents.
How many of the businesses downtown were surveyed? Do you know that?
So we sent invitations to all, I believe it was just over 140 businesses in the downtown district. We sent invitations to all of them and we received responses from 26. So not quite a quarter of our businesses responded. That said, we do have some valuable feedback there that we're happy to send along.
Thank you.
Hey, let me just ask you, and it brings up a good point. In your assessment, and obviously you've done surveys before, do you sense if a person basically feels comfortable how things are going, they find that there's probably no need to really do a survey? Or, and I share that with you from a perspective is, let's look at the other side. Do people who often have a very, maybe a more active activity or active wanting to get more active involvement will be much more accustomed to be part of a survey versus those who don't? I think going back to Joe's point, we're seeing you sent out 6,000. I'm really quite surprised you didn't get 5,900. And that's okay, but there could have been a bunch of them that just simply says, hey, I kind of like Roy as it is. I feel comfortable. We're moving our direction. I don't need to have a survey to talk one side or the other on this issue. So what's your assessment of that?
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. So something that we're constantly trying to combat as survey researchers is what we call non-response bias. So understanding whether that population who chooses to respond to a survey when invited is different from the population who chooses not to respond is pretty critical in ensuring that we have a representative sample. Now, part of the way that we try to mitigate some of the potential effects of non-response bias is by sending reminder invitations and following up with that sample of residents. So all of the residents in our sample were contacted, I believe 3 times in total. It might have been 4 by the time we sent a final reminder, in order to really try to boost that sense of civic duty and improve our response rate to the extent where we felt that we had a good swath of residents from various walks of life and aspects of their experience, and maybe some of those residents who would be less inclined to just volunteer their opinions to the city council, but when asked and then subsequently prodded a few times, they'll reluctantly tell us how they feel. So I think we account for some of that. That said, I think you're right. There is something to the fact that residents who are just sort of content and don't have strong opinions either way are less likely to respond. If you think about a customer satisfaction survey, most people who have an okay experience at a restaurant, for example, aren't going to go fill out a survey to complain or praise their waiter. Really, those people who have experiences that are a little bit polarizing or who feel the need to really speak up, and there are varying personality types that play into that. But usually those who volunteer their opinions first are the ones who have stronger opinions. And that's why we send out several invitations and reminders to try and mitigate some of that complacency in the middle.
Yeah, great comment. Let me just see if I can summarize a couple of things. I've taken some notes here, and I just want to kind of understand a little bit based on having read your results and then now seeing the presentation. I sense that you probably have about a 50-50 in terms of mixed use. You got people who are kind of strongly for it. I think your numbers were 52-48 or 52 something for commercial mixed use development with residential. And so you kind of got a little bit on the mixed use. And then you come back and indicated in the survey that there was really some issues with height. And height is an interesting one because I kind of wonder, Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but help me for the council here. We all have shopped or been to the Harmons. How tall is the Harmons building?
I believe it's 40 feet.
So Harmons department store right there in this particular general location is a 40-foot building. And at 40 feet, really based on what's being proposed, it would just be twice as big as the Harmons. That'd be the max it would be. Versus our original plan, which was to go to 12 stories. So we're really kind of cut that in half because we felt that 12 stories was really not something that was compatible for Roy. But I think at least our input and comments we got back indicated that we figure half of that would be reasonable. And Harmon's being 40 feet, then we'd be looking at a facility about twice as big as Harmon's. And then based on the data I read, it suggested even between a 5, 6, and 7-story, it was kind of mixed, about 33% in terms of how people assess what they prefer out of those 3 options. So it kind of was kind of a mixed bag there. But I was really kind of interested in your conclusion that how would people see it if they were looking at what we defer to as the A zone or A core, which is the further east. I sense from your presentation it was a little more compatible if it's pushed further east than if it was sitting right to the west side of 1900. And in 1900, it would be on the west side would be a little bit more of a problematic for people to accept that. Interesting enough, from your data you pointed, today anybody could walk into Roy City and put a 60-foot building up in Roy. It's perfect. It's within the statute. They'd be able to do that. Interesting enough, a lot of residents didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Mayor, I've got a comment that piggybacks on your last comment about the higher buildings pushed up towards the east. One of the things they wanted was walkability and open space.
Yeah.
Well, we know we're limited on space. So do you think, I'm asking you, Kyrene and Danny, could you appeal to the residents by, as a developer, they're obviously going to want to go as tall as they can. And some of the developers we've talked to, they are big on open space and things like that. And so if you created a walkable district with a lot of open space, but you had a couple of tall, 70-foot buildings in there, do you think that's the balance, would balance out what they're looking for based on your survey results?
Yeah, I think what the data suggests is that really that atmosphere that's created is paramount when it comes to a mixed use development. So if there's a desire for a developer, for example, to really maximize that square footage and utilize the full building height limitations, the key to mitigating concerns about that would be to create a pedestrian friendly space, ensure that there's ample parking so that that's a non-issue, and ensure that we're providing amenities on that surface or the street surface level that are appealing to residents. So focusing on the economic and commercial development opportunities. If we're incorporating residential space, ensuring that that's not on the ground level, that's not the only purpose that that building is serving. And then really creating an atmosphere that promotes walkability and an open feel is, I think, the way to mitigate that. And certainly that's something that a developer could communicate with residents and contextualize. And I think that's important, is being able to say, this is the area we're talking about. We're not talking about putting this in your backyard. We're talking about putting this along the I-15 corridor. There are some of those factors that weren't brought up in the survey that I think also make it a little bit more palatable or potentially easier to sell from that developer perspective.
Looking at some, I appreciate that. Looking at some of the developments of different developers that we've went out and looked at, that's what they've done, is they've went a little bit higher, but then they've used the breadth of the property to create walkable parks or plazas or walking trails that tie into different businesses throughout that district. So that's good to know. Thanks for your input.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Joe, because I think that's the key, is trying to understand that, which goes to the point, Matt and Steve, whatever the development may or may not propose, that site plan becomes a really critical component to this. How is it laid out? How does it fit based on what the residents are saying they'd like it to fit? And making sure that site plan meets the needs of not only the city, the developer, but the appeal, as we're hearing, what the residents would like to see in that kind of a development. So yeah, that's good. That's really good. Council, other questions?
Irene, I had a question on those last couple of slides when you were talking about the core A, core B. I was just wondering, could you maybe go back to those and explain how you were able to isolate that data out? And as you reviewed that, as you mentioned, they really weren't aware of that. So was this just, maybe you could explain that and how you came up with that data just a little bit more for me, please.
Sure, yeah. So I will caveat that we looked at the proposed code or ordinances for each of those areas. independent of the geographic areas themselves. So residents weren't shown this map. We didn't explain the difference between what those areas looked like in the city. So the real differentiator here is just the options that were presented in that package. And I'll pull that slide back up so that everyone can see this as we're discussing. Zoom in a little bit there. So looking at the different features in each of those cores is really what drives that decision preference for residents. So the combinations are pulled together using a statistical model that takes each of these individual utility scores and looks at residents' likelihood to choose a package that includes these options collectively. So we're able to control for the combination of features rather than just looking at one feature at a time in this complete package. So for our Core A package, and hopefully I have the description and features right here. But so our Core A package or simulation is just including storefronts and building facades less than 20 feet away from the sidewalk and road surface, apartments or condominiums above street level commercial spaces, buildings up to 7 stories or no more than 80 feet, parking garages in addition to on-site parking lots, and walkable plazas and courtyards incorporated into those developments. And so when we look at a development that fits that description of what would be allowed in Core A, we come up with that coin toss or almost a 50-50 split. 48% of residents find that appealing. And then looking at the Core B sort of ordinance components, again, storefronts and building facades less than 20 feet from the road surface, apartments and condominiums, so that mixed use feature, but buildings up to 5 stories or no more than 60 feet. And then parking garages again and walkable plazas and courtyards incorporated into those spaces. And there we have 56% of residents who say that they approve that type of development. So again, that was absent the description of where it would go.
So Kyrene, the only difference in those two is the building height. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So that's what changes the approval or the disapproval rating. That's the only real thing that made the difference.
That's really driving the decision there. Yeah. And it's my understanding that at least given this feature set, that would really be the differentiation between Core A and Core B. And certainly if I've misunderstood that, we can go back and run various other simulations. But essentially, it seems like Core A and Core B would have the same, or could have the same potential features in those developments, just with the variation on building height limits.
I wonder if the outcome would have been a little different if they knew where it was at.
And that's what we didn't control for. So we tried to restrict residents to, thinking about downtown broadly, and then certainly, yeah, we'd have to bring residents along with a specific development in each of these areas if there were a concrete proposal to consider.
Right. Okay. Hey, that's great information. Let me ask you, obviously this is really fascinating in terms of presentation. What's the chances of Roy City getting a copy of that presentation?
We have a PDF already to send to Matt along with a crosstab document. So we'll have, if there are any other subgroup analyses that you'd like to look into, variations by age group or region of the city that we didn't cover in this presentation, you'll have those numbers as well.
That's perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. We appreciate
Mayor,
that. Please.
I really appreciate that Kyrene can explain some of those things to us. So as we move forward, can we still reach out to them? I mean, is that still within our ability from what we employed them to do, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, the structure of the contract, Matt, basically is, I believe the procedural or the contract requirement is to provide this presentation, and the survey results. If we want to extend that contract to get maybe more deep stuff as we get engaged in things, I guess we can make that happen. What's your comments on that, Matt? Mike?
There it is. I'll definitely work with them. We can renegotiate something if it was a lot of work, or we could just talk. But yeah, they've been very, very helpful in my communication with them. So yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm not asking them to do deeper, but maybe help me as a layperson understand it, be able to, you know, their opinions on what that means is really fascinating to me. Rather
We're
than me.
happy to, yeah, we're happy to answer follow-up questions and sort of help to interpret the data as helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, Diane, I think you had a comment.
A question in regards to when you were taking the numbers and deciding which parts were most important. So appearance looked like there was more input than your graph showed. And, you know, the percentages looked like it was, I think, 52% wanted greater than 20 foot back, 48 less than that. And then the Parks and Plaza, you know, was a lot bigger than it seemed like when we were looking at the numbers. I was wondering, how do you differentiate the impact on that, where the appearance seemed to be a smaller impact than it looked by the numbers, and the you know, open space seemed bigger? That was one question. And the second question, I was just wondering, how do you calculate your margin of error?
Yeah, so the margin of error is the easier question to answer quickly. So I'll do that first. Margin of error is based on population size and sample size of the survey itself. So as long as the survey respondents are randomly sampled, we can be fairly confident that our margin of error is a pretty simple statistical calculation based on, yeah, purely on sample size and population of the city of Roy. So we looked at the total adult population of Roy, set that as our base. And then the margin of error is based on that sample as a whole of 814 respondents through the city. For subgroups, when we're looking at sort of the geographic breakdowns and things like that, our margin of error would be higher because that sample size is smaller. So focusing back on the disparity, I guess, between the size of impact across feature sets. And I'm going to jump back to this slide for now, but let me know if there's another one that would be helpful to review. So when we're looking at the level of impact for each feature category, this sort of magnitude or the size of the bar is relative to the predictive impact or the significance or likelihood of an option being chosen. Now, all of these things are taken sort of in combination or controlling for all of the other features. So the statistical modeling that we use here controls for these other utility scores. And while they are percentage values on this chart, they're really relative values. So it's compared to each of the other features presented in the chart. All of that to say, I don't know that I have a succinct, non-statistically jargon-heavy way to describe how each of these factors play with one another to sort of carry the weight. The simplest answer is that the walkable plazas and courtyards are 10 times as predictive or as powerful in the decision-making process for residents as the appearance or how far away the building is from the street level. So really it's a relative comparison to the other features included in combinations here. Help me understand if I've answered your question or if there's something more complex than that.
I think that helps. But one of the other questions I did have was, do you have any highlights of some of the information and data you received from the businesses? I know you said you didn't have a statistical significant amount, but are there some highlights you could share with us tonight?
As you might expect, I think business owners in the downtown area have pretty strong preferences for commercial development only and avoiding mixed use actually. Again, it's not statistically significant. We have a very small sample size, but that's the biggest takeaway that I would share in just briefly reviewing those results. I will say that we can send those results along and we have sort of an anonymized breakdown of those business leader results as well. So if you're interested in perusing those in depth, that outreach tool was available for business leaders to participate for nearly 3 weeks. So we had hoped to get a few more trickle in, but I'm happy to share those with you after this call as well.
Okay. Yeah, I will indicate to you, I read through a lot of the verbal comments that were provided. Interesting that in those comments, there was a lot of information. You probably read a few, that a lot of them didn't have any relevance to this entire survey. Almost like it was an opportunity people to speak out and make a comment.
Oh, yeah.
I still love the one about the burned out house that was in there that obviously still, by the way, it's being fixed. So we're pretty excited about that. And so I guess I can appreciate the comments, because it does, if there's some way to quantify that, it may give some of a pulse of how people feel about just living in Roy, at least from their perspective. But the data seems to be really interesting because what it pointed to, as I read through the data, and you pointed to a lot of that in this briefing, it seems to be that people really are looking for change in Roy City. They're looking for the downtown to be different. And they're looking for some type of modernizations. And the debate maybe will be whether that's going to be a lot of commercial, or the debate's going to be a mix of commercial and mixed use. What I think I got from your presentation, which I didn't get reading the data, was they do not want standalone multi-housing. They're not wanting that kind of development downtown. And interesting enough, Roy City is not proposing that. The draft chapter 13 does not put on the ground floor, any residential at all. That has been removed completely from the proposed plan. And so the challenge we have now is to finding that right mix of enhancing commercial, and then if we can let the developer or the landowner choose. And it's important that we make this understanding. There is no mandate in this proposed document we're considering for them to have to use mixed use. It's just one option, and an option by which the property owner can decide. If they don't want it, it's perfect. We're not driving any of that. But the important part would be is that at least it gives them a choice to consider that. So personally, I liked the presentation. It was wonderful. You provided some real insight. I even learned a few things from your presentation that I did not extract from the data that you provided to us. And so again, thank you so very much. Council, any other questions or comments? Something you'd like to talk about or ask? Brian.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Just a question and then a comment. Regarding the building height, because that seems to be the focus of what separates the two proposed projects. Is there, because you've done other surveys for other cities, is that something that you generally run into, where building height is the make or break?
You know, this study was a little bit unique to Roy in that the features that we were testing for this mixed use ordinance aren't things that we've really vetted in other cities. I will say that the most comparable experience we've had was when we conducted a survey in Lehigh about how they were interested in revitalizing their downtown space. And the thing that residents really pushed back on was the idea of having high rises in downtown Lehigh. They were afraid that that would ruin the small town feel of the community. So we do think that especially along certain parts of the Wasatch Front, we see residents who are really committed to an identity of the city that means that they aren't Salt Lake, that they chose to live in this area for a reason. And we saw some of that pop up among Roy residents, that, you know, the character of the community that they live in is different for a reason, and that's intentional. And so to just proceed with high rises might be detrimental to that sense of identity. That said, when it comes to, you know, a development that is well executed and includes all of these features that residents are interested in seeing, it's not a deal breaker, but it is certainly a strong decision-making factor.
Okay.
And that is
just a quick comment. 81% thinks that of the public survey believes we're going the right direction. Do you, in doing other cities, do you run into that very often? Because
That's a
all
remarkably high
there's
score.
bad things about politicians. So
Yeah,
That
we're
is
we're
well
used
above
to
average.
seeing yeah,
it
we're used
is
to seeing
above
people
average.
complain, but it is an above average sort of sense that the city is headed in the right direction. Yeah.
What is the context of that we're headed in the right direction with what we're doing, what we're proposing, or, because there's been a period of time that we haven't done much, and now all of a sudden we're trying to revitalize downtown. We're trying to, we put a transportation plan into effect. We're doing some rezonings and that's what I was wondering in the context of 81%.
Yeah, so that question was asked at the beginning of the survey before we got into any of the specific questions about downtown. So that's just a general sentiment about how the city is doing, which is why we presented it in that sort of city health report card view. That's a really high level metric on quality of life in the city. And if we saw that really dip, it would point to some type of discontent among residents that needs to be addressed. Where that metric really is above average, it seems like residents are overall satisfied with the way the city is being run, and that's good news.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Danny had a comment. I've seen your hand come up a couple of times.
Well, I
Oh.
was just going to say that I like about the survey, I don't want to have apartments lining 1900, 8 feet tall neither. And I know everything we talked about would be against the freeway. And I like that they want new restaurants and mixed use and a change and modernization of downtown. And that's what I think we've all talked about is, we don't want to make it a road you drive down like a tunnel, but we do want to bring modernization and update the city. And I don't know what developers are going to come in and what they want, but I know we've talked about not having anything 80 feet tall on the west side of 1900. And but I was one of those people that you had to email 3 times before I turned in my survey. So sorry about that.
No, I'm
Oh,
glad.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I
It
think,
takes everyone.
I think to Ann's point, we have been on this journey now for 2 years. Anybody who's interested in Roy City has heard council members, planning commissioners. We've had newspaper articles talking about what we said was the vision. We've had a lot of exposure that says we want to move the city in the right direction. I'm going to clarify my opinion a little clearer with Joe, because his comment was asking a more deeper question. I think the people in the survey were basically saying is because we're moving in the right direction, their meaning is we're finally moving. There is activity to take our downtown and bring about positive change. And I have interpreted that, particularly with like I say, the newspaper articles our public has been reading, them seeing and hearing us talk about this. This is about the 23rd, maybe 22nd public meeting we've had on this topic. We are not keeping anything held back. We are very, very transparent. And I think the public is saying, keep going, keep doing this. This is what we've been needing a long time. And this city council, this city administration are finally simply says, hey, they're doing what the public says they wanted to do. Now, the particulars may very well be, how do we get the restaurants? How do we get the theater? How do we do an appropriate mixed use so it's effective? That's the fine tuning. But if we kind of in aggregate look at everything that we've basically been doing over the last 2 years, I think where this city leadership has basically giving, in an essence, an astounding, you're moving in the right direction, keep moving, get this done. And that's how I'm interpreting the 81% satisfaction rate. Danny, you were going to make a comment, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, it sounds like everyone has a really good pulse on what the general population of Roy is thinking. Just that they want that sense of community in Roy, but I think that sense of community is not tied to downtown. where there's this sense of community. Like Roy is a great place to live. There are vast majority of residents are saying we're going in the right direction. You know, we approve of where Roy is and where it's going, but they still want downtown to be upgraded, and they see it upgraded, like you said, in that more commercial mixed use realm. And it's just interesting to see that everyone's input is very similar to what the residents have to say as well. So that's also really great to see. And obviously you guys have great city staff who are really well connected too. I think they helped in the design of this survey a lot, Matt especially. So it's just been great to be in this process, and you guys got a good hold on it. So.
Well, we look forward to the rest of the data that you can send us. Obviously, the charts are important. Any other data would be helpful. That we appreciate that. Council, Diane, you may have had another question you'd like to ask.
I was just wondering if you had any other input in regards to economic development and what, as you were drawing out the pieces, what that meant to people, because I got the impression that maybe they were okay with mixed use, or they were okay with residential, and some people liked it, but you brought up the term destination commercial seemed to really be a focus. And we've had these discussions before that destination commercial is not usually something that goes into a ground floor commercial area underneath residents, but it needs a little more open space to have its own area. I was just wondering what your input or feedback in that regard for destination commercial and that differentiation.
Yeah, so in terms of economic development and the things that residents are most interested in seeing, really the things that jump to the top of the list are those entertainment options, dining options, and then new attractive retail. So the things that, yeah, destination commercial, as in what's something that draws residents to downtown Roy for those activities that they aren't really currently visiting downtown for. So whether that's a night out with the family for fun or a romantic date night, those are the things that residents point to that there isn't really a way for them to meet their needs in downtown Roy right now. So more dining options with more variety that are a little bit more sit down and, you know, create, again, that ambiance, that atmosphere of this is a walkable place. This is a place I can spend an afternoon with the kids or spend a romantic evening. I think there are a variety of sort of retail options or dining especially, and then some of those entertainment venues as well. So a few different residents pointed to the downtown Ogden area that has a movie theater and some of those things that are a little bit easier to accommodate with higher buildings. So those are some of the things that I would point to.
Yeah, and we can see that in the data when only 18% have used downtown Roy for like a romantic date or evening at least like twice a year, which is so interesting that's just even residents of Roy are only going 2 times a year to have those kind of, you know, family or romantic evenings. But that's what they want, and those are the kind of options that they want.
Yeah, good comment. Okay, well, we appreciate it. Anything else before we adjourn the presentation? Okay. Hey, thank you so much. Just wonderful presentation, great detail, a lot of depth. We appreciate all the analysis. That was great. You surely have answered a lot of questions for us that we needed answers to, and hopefully the council can take your input and now do something with it. So again, thank you. We want to stay in touch. Let me just make a point, and Matt, this may be more of a long-reaching issue. You've touched 6,000 of our residents. That's pretty impressive. Last time back in 2015, 16, I worked with Weber State University and we did a similar survey. After a whole lot of time, I'm talking about months, we were able to get about 720, 730 people in the entire, and we had to do a lot of door knocking to get that to happen. You were able to do that in just a couple of weeks, and more importantly, you got some great information back. So with those contacts, we may have to reach out to you again and help us continue to kind of get that feedback from the public of what they're thinking. So please, again, we're very appreciative of that. Matt, in reference to your working with this great team, do you have any comments you'd like to share with us?
Well, I just want to say I truly appreciate it. It's been wonderful working with you. Hopefully we'll work soon together. And I also want to know where Danny's at, because I've been a little envious about the sunlight there. So it's kind of nice.
Just spending a little bit of time in Hawaii right now.
No, rubbing it in.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good job. Very
Yeah,
impressed.
I was looking at the back and I seeing that was a real thing back there. I didn't see a plane fly by, but I can definitely tell when there's a reflection in that mirror, that glass, and that was not a screenshot like Joe has on the back of his back. So anyway,
That's what I
we
should have
appreciate
done.
it. Yeah. Next time, if we do this, please invite us. We can carry this presentation in Hawaii. Okay.
Anytime, of course.
Anchor location in Hawaii for the next meeting. Got it.
I like that. Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure.
Okay. Hey, Matt, if you would, go ahead, they'll reach out, see if we can get some of that other data that they've got and provide that to the council.
Irene will, when she sends it over, I'll send it out to everybody.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful effort. Okay, that's the presentation. We've got 3 action items we need to go through, council. With that, let's go ahead. We'll jump into the first action item, specifically Ordinance 21-3. And Steve, I think you're going to talk this one, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Let me share my screen and go over some things. Everybody see my screen here?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, move you guys' faces over to another screen so I can see you as I talk. The Ordinance 21-3 is basically the approval of the ordinance that we've been talking about, the mixed use ordinance in Chapter 13. Some of the things I want to go over tonight are kind of the changes, the specific changes that will happen to the entire zoning ordinance. Those aren't some things that we've necessarily been discussing a lot, but there are some chapters that this introduction of Chapter 13 affect, and therefore we need changes to it. So just kind of, if I can get it to work, there we go. So just as a reminder, anything that's bold is being added, anything struck through is going to be removed. So the first one is Chapter 6. Chapter 6 basically just identifies the zones within the city. So it goes through, the residential estates, the single family, the duplex zones, the multifamily, the commercials, and so on and so on. With the changes that we're looking at in downtown, the RC zone basically goes away. So we'd remove the regional commercial zone. With that, number 6 doesn't need to say districts, it just needs to have one. And then we'd add a number 10 mixed use districts, an A downtown. I know last time we discussed kind of to change what the titles were of each of those districts. What I kind of came up with was downtown east, that it would have been core A, downtown west, which was core B, and then downtown gateway. I know the mayor kind of mentioned that, gateway might be the core A because of I-15, but we also have entryways into Roy on Riverdale Road and the 1900 West. And seeing that the general kind of covers 2 of the 3 gateways, I figured that would probably be the better place to put, a gateway as a designation. Again, this is kind of a change, something new. So I, open for discussion on that. Again, I'm not married to what they are. I just think it kind of describes, east, west, and gateway pretty well with where those different zones are.
Council, do you have comments on this?
I like what it says. I think it's great.
I agree.
Okay. Other thoughts?
That's the first I've seen it, but I think it describes it well. I'm not opposed to that. I don't have a problem with the termination on it or the terminology on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Diane, Brian, any
Okay.
thoughts?
Okay.
Okay,
We'll kind of move
go
on.
ahead.
Again, in Chapter 6, this is where it kind of talks about the purposes of each zoning district. I know in chapter 13, section 1, we kind of go over more exact of what this ordinance is for. So this is just kind of a generalized paragraph. Again, number 7, where it talked about the commercial districts, just removing regional commercial from that, and anything that talked about multiples or plural districts in that, and then adding the mixed use zone paragraph. So again, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look like at it. that or Gives have a any reason concerns for the with it. mixed use and what it's there for. Yeah. A purpose. Doesn't just necessarily get into the detail, it's just to get general idea. So if everybody's okay with that, then
So,
Yep.
okay, Steve?
Table 10 or chapter 10 talks about the setback requirements. And again, this is just I still have DTB, A, B, and C, but I'll change that to east, west in general. But this would be to remove, again, the setback requirements in the regional commercial zones and then add the downtown, not to have it in this table, but the way our ordinances are written, if someone went to chapter 10 to see the setbacks, then this would refer them to chapter 13, so they could read it to figure out what the setbacks were depending on the building type that they were looking at. So again, it's just removing the RC and adding the downtown. And so I apologize that the DTA, DTB, and DTC were overlooked on my end, but they'd still be the downtown, east, west, and gateway. Chapter 13, here we're just adding the entire chapter. Those sections that we've discussed over the last several meetings. Things have been added, things have been deleted, but most of those we've talked about extensively. So I don't think there was many changes that we needed to go over that.
Steve, can I ask a question before you?
Yes, ma'am.
Just real quickly, going back to the previous slide, I don't see 80 foot anywhere there. Am I missing something?
Well, this is just adding chapter 13 to the ordinance. The 80 foot would be part of the building types. So everything within the downtown east would allow 80, and anything in the downtown west is 60, and anything in the downtown gateway is 40.
Okay. Okay. But that doesn't show up on that previous chart, right?
On this one, no,
That
because
one.
it's this is referring you to chapter 13 to read it.
Right.
Rather than saying it here, well, because it depends on which zone or district you're in, and which building type will depend on how tall it can be.
I guess that's just confusing to me that it says maximum building height. I don't know.
But that's for all the other zones. Here, the downtown doesn't show
I
any of
see.
that. It just says refer to.
I understand now. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I understand it now.
And the only reason why I put it in there is because if a developer comes in that may have developed in Roy, a few times, they'll just know, oh, I just got to go to chapter 10 to figure out what the setbacks
I
were.
see. I understand. It was me that was not understanding it.
No.
Thank you.
I'm here to answer anything and everything, so no big deal. Again, just adding in chapter 13, going to chapter 17, which has the table of uses. Again, 13 has, as you notice here, has section 2 lists the uses. So in chapter 17, we're just removing the list of uses in the regional commercial zone. So it's not there. But at the top of it, we are saying there is a mixed use zone, but you need to see chapter 13 to find out what those, the uses are or what's allowed.
So it's just basically these two different sections, the one Jan was just talking about in this one, it's referring all this information to chapter 13 of this title.
I see. Thank you.
Yep. And then same with the off-street parking requirements. Chapter 6 or section 6 of chapter 13
tells you how much parking is required, how much this, that, and the other. I wanted to keep it similar to how other developers may look at it. So it just says, in this district, go to chapter 13. So it's kind of being consistent. And then chapter 1 is more of just definitions. There are several definitions that came out of the mixed use ordinance that we didn't have or don't have in the ordinance. So this is just defining what, a facade is or what open space type is, pedestrian way. So those would just go into chapter 31 and then just be put in alphabetical order with what's existing there. And that's all I have on ordinance 21-3. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll just continue on to 21-4 because it's fairly the same presentation.
Okay.
So 21-4 is basically just changing the zoning map, taking what's existing that says RC and changing it. So kind of give you an idea with an aerial view of how things will look. The yellow is the gateway, the blue is the west, and the red is the east. This one shows you the existing map and the proposed map. I kept them in the proposed map. I kept in red because that's what more commercial is versus the blue and purple, which represents more manufacturing and office type uses. So there are several. This just kind of shows you what the zoning map would be changed to with the bright red as the east, the orangish flame as west, and the really dark red as gateways.
With that color, that brings into the way you've named it really makes more sense. The
Yes.
gateway is you've got Riverdale Road feeding in, you got 5,700 feeding up, or 5,600. And then you've got 1,900 on both ends of town. So
There is one section of the RC that is changing to community commercial.
Right.
And that's just south of that one little neighborhood where originally it would have encompassed the neighborhood and the homes. When we looked at it and everybody wanted to kind of cut it back, I didn't see it relevant to keep this little section as regional commercial, especially knowing that could be a 60-foot tall building.
Right.
People were concerned, and in order to protect those residents, changing it to CC, which would only allow for a 40-foot building.
Is that right where the bowling alley is? Is that what I'm looking at?
The bowling alley, if you can see my cursor, is just south of 5150.
Okay.
And this
Oh, it's
is
by
what
the old
kinda has-
Jorgensen's bookstore.
it's by
Yeah, it
Point
has
West
Ferguson's
Graphics.
bookstore, the tire shop,
Right.
Ogden carpet. and a
Okay.
few
Okay.
Offices
Thank
in the
you.
back.
There's like
Thank
a half
you
a
for
dozen
saying that.
houses back there.
It
Yeah.
doesn't make anything non-conforming. It just basically says if you're going to redevelop any of that, you're only going to get 40 feet.
Thank you.
Which is really kind of what the residents wanted when we first got the input a few months ago. They felt that they would like to have that buffer. And the council agreed to go ahead and separate the two and take them out. And I think that's a perfect fit. So community commercial is perfect right there.
Yep. So, and that would be my presentation.
Okay, council, any questions for Steve?
I like it. Been a lot of work put into this over the last definite
Year.
hardcore year for us, but it's been longer for some.
Yeah, it
Yes.
has been a year, and I believe a little over a year in the planning commission. So we've been at this for a little over 2 years.
And
So-
it's like I stated earlier, I really appreciate the survey that encompasses 814 of our citizens. I know each of us has talked to residents, formulated our opinions and thoughts. We've received a lot of emails that go into this. So been a lot of efforts that have been into it, and I appreciate it.
Agree. Okay, council, with that then, do I have a motion then to approve ordinance 21-3 to amend the Roy City Municipal Code, Title 10 zoning regulation, amending the Chapter 6 establishing the zoning districts, amend the Chapter 10 general property development standards, adding chapter 13 mixed use, amending chapter 17 table of uses, table 17.2 non-residential zoning districts, and amending chapter 19 off-street parking and loading. Table 19-1 off-street parking requirements and amending the chapter 31, which has the definition. Steve walked through that pretty clearly with us. Do I have a motion then to approve?
So moved.
Okay, Joe said yes.
I'd like to make another motion. I'm
Hold-
sorry, Mayor. I thought we were going to have some discussion after our questions with Steve to incorporate some of the survey results, but so I take it that's not the case. I didn't want to interrupt you as you were saying that, but so
Well,
the substitute motion would be to table it so we could incorporate those findings as opposed to just do it. So that would be my substitute motion, would be to table it so we can actually incorporate the findings from the survey.
Okay, we now have two motions on the table. One motion was, we didn't get to the second, but I think I heard a second on the first motion. But we have a second motion. The second motion would be is to table the ordinance 21-3. Do I have a second to table?
I'll second that.
Okay, so I'm hearing now we have a second to table this. Okay, I need to basically go through a roll call vote. Morgan, would you go ahead and call a roll call vote?
What do you do about the original motion that was on the table?
I have to address the motions they are. So now I got a second. I have a motion. I have to address the motion that came in the result of the first motion. And I have to clear that one out. If the council does not approve the motion to table, then we go back to the original motion and I ask for a motion to approve ordinance 20-3. Andy, you want to make comments on that?
Bob, you're absolutely correct. That's the right process.
Okay, so I need a roll call vote. I need to know who's going to basically want to table this or who wants to basically get this done today.
Councilmember Saxton,
Table,
say that one more time.
table.
Councilmember Wilson,
I would be a yay for the motion.
thank you. Councilmember Wilson,
Aye for table.
Councilmember Jackson,
When we say table, we're like taking one more work session and then that's what we're talking about.
I don't know what it means. So after we get done with this vote, we'll figure out what table means, because table can mean we sit on this for another couple of years, couple of days, couple of months. I don't know what that means. I think the contractor did a real nice job in defining exactly what the status of what the data told us. I think they did a real good job explaining everything. I don't know, having looked at the data and all the inputs, what could else be derived from the contractor. But it appears if the council believes they want to table it and have the contractor sit down and provide another briefing or do another survey or whatever it is they want to do, they can surely do that. But at this point, the motion on the thing is to table this, and then we'll try to define somehow to figure out what we do next, because I'm not sure there is anything next, but let you decide. Go ahead. Jackson?
No.
Okay. Morgan?
Councilmember Paul,
Nay.
Councilmember Burrell.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is tabled. Now, before we move on, that will table both ordinance 21-3 and 21-4. Before we proceed, I'd like to know what you want to do, Councilmember Wilson.
I believe that the survey was excellent and it solidified some of the concerns we have, but I don't feel that we took the time. I thought we were going to discuss it before the motion, because I do believe that height was still a very important issue and that the 80-foot is a height that we need to discuss. Setback possibly, and economic development was very important. So I believe that those still need to be incorporated into the current document as it's written, because I don't believe that it fully supports what the citizens gave us on the survey results.
The 814 citizens, don't forget that. Of the 6,000,
the surveys that were sent out.
That's correct, but it was, at least it was a proper distribution, and I believe it definitely supports the information I've been receiving as a council member throughout this period of time. The height issue was absolutely important in all of the phone calls I've been receiving, as well as the other two things I mentioned.
Okay, so your position then is the next meetings will discuss whether 80 feet is a proper height. You're asking and you're stating that we'll discuss about setbacks, which, by the way, there was no preference. And you also indicated that we should have commercial zones because you're indicating it's all about commercial development. Is that what you want to talk about?
Because of the destination commercial, that's correct.
Okay, and you would agree with me when I said for 25 years, we've had the same ordinance in place to allow that to happen, and it never happened. So I guess my concern is going to be is that your position would be is that they want commercial. We've had it open to commercial, but somehow there's going to be a magical change that's going to occur if we basically disapprove this ordinance that we have commercial. And I'm not sure I understand what you want more out of that, but let's discuss that in the workshop. Because
Please.
obviously we're not going to get here from here on that. So, okay, we have a decision. We're going to table it. We think we have 3 areas. Is there any other areas in this assessment you figure you want to talk about?
I think those are the most important. Ideally, if we actually had more specific data like retail mapping, and if we had data, even an updated leakage study would help us know more specifically what we could do with this great opportunity we have. This catalyst of Northrop Grumman is excellent. I believe that the mixed use is important, but I believe we just have not completely supported the response from the citizens in the way the document is written presently.
Well, let me offer a suggestion because I think there's a couple of key points here. I think what you're basically saying is, have you looked at the general planned amendment that basically is being proposed? You have a draft copy of that.
Absolutely, I have read
Did you
that.
read the leakage study information in that document?
In 2014, I believe it was.
No. That's 2 separate.
Okay.
Read
but
the current information in the general plan amendment that is
Yes,
basically there. Read that one. It is different data. Conclusion exactly the same. And I'll be blunt. And 2 contractors providing the assessment simply says Roy City cannot expect to get a Target, cannot expect to get a Walmart. The best thing we can hope for is a hotel and a theater as a destination. The councils in the past have allowed Roy City to sit idle for too long. And as a result of that, a lot of opportunities that went to Clinton, a lot of opportunities that went to Layton, went to Ogden, went to Riverdale, Roy City missed. And that's
And
what it's going to tell you.
I will definitely, I have read the general plan, proposed general plan, and I am certainly will be in the process to read that again as well.
I think you should, because it does talk
Absolutely.
about the leakage study and it does talk about the issues you're talking about. So right now, all I'm going to basically focus on is the height, the setback, and the commercial. Is there anything else we should focus on?
I
Mayor,
believe,
can I just make a comment?
Please.
I thought the survey was really, really good. And I agree with the findings in the survey as far as I thought that they brought out some really good points. I just need more than the time of presentation to the time of vote to absorb it. I am ready to move forward as a representative of my neighborhood, as a representative of my constituents. But I need just, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, a work session to be able to have this conversation and then decide if there's any little tweaks that we need to make before we move forward.
Well, then my
I'm not
recommendation
asking
would
for
be
a
that,
2-year.
Jan, do this.
Pardon?
I don't know what your questions are going to be and what you want the contractor to ask you or provide
I
to
don't
you.
know that either, but
Okay.
I've been reading through it, absolutely. But the questions came up as we went through the presentation tonight. So to vote on that without answering those questions, then I need to solidify those and get those to them.
Okay, Matt, here's what we need from you then. I need to have you, basically, you'll get the presentation information and you'll get that, if you can distribute that to the council. I'm going to call a special city council meeting, work session, so that we can basically sit down however long it takes to get through this.
Okay.
And if that's the case, we'll call it for next week. We'll have an opportunity to do that. You cannot
Can we do it
approve.
before next council meeting?
It has to be, because we cannot make a decision in a city council meeting or in a
And
work
maybe
session.
we could
It
have
has
an
to be in
in
a council.
person.
You
We've all
stated
had the
next week.
vaccine, so maybe we could have an in-person meeting in the basement where we
We could.
can, because we've all had the vaccine except for you, and you could just wear 2 masks.
What I'm saying, Mayor, is you stated we'd do a work session next week. I think you meant before next council meeting.
Yeah, but we can call a special work session anytime. We can call tomorrow. I'm just not sure you're ready until you see the information the contractor sends to you. So
That's
let's
correct.
do this. We can call a work session anytime, okay? And we can, if it's an emergency, we can call it tomorrow morning.
Let's
But
just.
that's
do it
not the
before
case
next
here.
council meeting.
Well,
Pardon?
my concern is it may not necessarily be enough. Here's my point.
Right.
There's obviously still there's still a few questions that still need to be ironed out. Remember, we addressed all the height issues, and the consensus of the council was 80 feet was acceptable. Some didn't like that, but that was accepted. We talked about let's finish me, Diane. We also talked about a 300-foot corridor of commercial only. We talked about a 200-foot commercial only. We talked about putting blocks in there, just identify the blocks. None of those the council collectively wanted. We're now talking about setbacks. We had a conversation about setbacks way back in June or July when we first got the changes that we wanted. All that was flushed out. We're now at a point where we're ready to make a decision, and now we're asking to go back and revisit those. You're the council, you have the policy authority. Here's what I'd like to do. I'll call a work session for next week.
I will not be available.
I'm going to call a work session for next week. We'll figure out a day that's going to work for everybody, but we need that work session. If in fact in that work session, we still can't come up with a solution, then we'll call another work session just prior to the city council meeting. But at some point in time, we have got to get this behind us. And I can give you, and I sent all of you the reason why we've got to get this done. If at the end of the day, you say you do not want this ordinance, vote against it. Get us behind this thing so we can move on. But at this moment, council, at this very moment, you are stopping the people's work on so many fronts. We cannot move forward on so many issues because you cannot get past this issue. And the staff cannot proceed. We can't proceed with the cemetery issues. We can't proceed with the airport. We can't proceed with the train station. We can't proceed with what we're required under the current general plan. You making changes to this document will require a complete review of the entire general plan. Again, these are mandated requirements that have to be done. So to sit back and basically say, let's stretch this out for a few more months, you have stopped the city from doing anything. Make a decision. Even if the decision is, I don't want this and we'll never have that, that's a decision. But postponing this is creating such a problem with the staff and our ability to get things done, we don't know what to do. So it's time to just simply step up and simply says, I'm either going to accept this or I'm not going to accept it. And let's take the vote. Otherwise, dragging this thing out over and over and more years and more months is not going to help. We've got to make a decision and we've got to move forward. Brian, you had a comment.
I do. The survey results we've had for less than a week. 52 pages of survey results. And we didn't get all we've gotten is less than a week. And we didn't implement tonight a single thing that they brought up. We didn't even address it. And the reason we didn't address it is because we have stacked their presentation with the approval of this ordinance.
Yes.
And that's not fair.
Well, Brian, but
Now,
look at it
granted-
this way, Brian. Look at it this way. This was a validation of what the people said they wanted. What other questions did you expect to come out of the survey that was not answered?
I think
What?
I didn't hear us change the height limit.
No, wait a minute, Brian.
They
The
talked
data, if you
about
read the data, simply said this, it was in the presentation. 30% of the people said 3 stories. 30% of the people said 5 stories. 30% of the people said 7 stories.
No, 72%.
No, wait a
Look
minute,
back up
Brian.
the survey.
Read the draw.
70
Did you not see the presentation? I looked at the data. I can show you page by page what the data
Mayor,
says.
I'm telling you, when you go back, you're gonna find 72% of the respondents were against the 8-story building or the 80.
Okay, Brian.
82.
Okay, Brian. Here's what we'll do then. We will have a work session, try to get everybody there, and we'll debate the height. That's one of the elements. The other element would be setback. The last element would be commercial. Is there anything else that you want to talk about in that that workshop?
Me personally,
Well, you're a member of the council. You got to have the answers. What are you
Well,
looking for?
to be, you know what? I was ready to vote,
Yeah,
but the bottom line is that we did not incorporate any of that information into our vote. And I'm just thinking, why?
okay. Brian?
We haven't rushed it yet. Why rush it tonight?
We're not rushing anything. We've been at this for 2 years, Brian. But hey, the council has spoken, Brian. The council has spoken.
I've been ready to vote for months.
Then let's vote.
Mayor,
Let's vote,
Mayor, can I
Please.
can I make a comment?
please.
It seems that we did a survey. We spent citizen money on doing a survey.
Yes.
And we ought to make sure that we have vetted everything in that survey before we make the vote. And that would be my only issue. I haven't vetted that yet.
Okay.
As a council together, I think we need the conversation, the civil conversation.
Well, we'll have a civil. My comment really is, I can't prepare what the staff and Matt we're going to need to have in front of you if you don't tell me what you're looking for.
I would like to see the business information and I would like to see the
Okay.
presentation that they gave us tonight
Perfect.
in front of me as I have that conversation.
Okay.
That would be the things I would like to see.
And that's what you want going into the work session, is that correct?
That would be very helpful to me.
Perfect. Okay. Joe Paul, what do you want?
I'm golden. I would have voted yes tonight for it. The survey really validated to me that the majority of people are on board with moving on downtown. There's some ups and downs, just like I talked about. People are worried about height, but if you give them more open space, you give them more plazas, walkable area, we can work through it. I'm good with going one more week because I understand some people have concerns, but I don't need a question answered. I'm golden. Vote
Okay.
on it and move. But let's do a work session to make sure we vetted out the survey and then move forward. Because I also look at the survey as 814 people. I've looked at other surveys that we've done that are 700 people. You know, you get 50 people commenting on Facebook, you get 20 emails. We are a city of 40,000 people. We're elected to make decisions.
Okay. And
Can I make one more comment?
Please.
I appreciate the work of the Planning Commission, and I believe that they have done everything they can to do what we've asked them to do. And I think we need to support that. Just give them input if there are any little pieces that we want to change, because they're elected to enforce those, or they're assigned to enforce
It's
those.
not.
We have a little bit of a different assignment for our position. So I don't want them to take this as not supporting them by tabling it for a very brief time. I don't want them to feel unsupported.
Okay. And do you have any comments or anything you want to talk in this work session?
Well, I thought that we had already talked about the height downtown and, but in nothing, in everything, 80 feet on the east side of the freeway. I just feel like by the survey and everybody I've talked to and the board that my daughter is on, everybody's ready to move downtown. And I just feel with all the articles I'm reading about everything going on up at Hillfield, I just don't want to miss the boat. I just want to get it passed, but I want to have a session, and like I said, we just heard the survey tonight, get everything answered, but I'm ready to move forward. I just don't want us to miss the opportunity to get the businesses and the restaurants and with, and somewhere for all those people that are going up to Norfolk Grumman, they're bringing in all these people. I want them to have somewhere to stay. I want a restaurant, want some affordable housing, some mixed use development. But I don't want, 80 feet on both sides. And I know we talked about only having that against the freeway, which would never, obstruct anybody's view. But I'm one more work session and I'm ready to move forward. I want us to get going on this. I know we have contractors waiting, and I just don't want to miss the boat.
Well, then that brings up a good point. Do I need to have the work session next week? Should I have it an hour before or 2 hours before our next city council meeting so you can walk into the city council meeting ready to vote?
I would rather have it not right before city council meeting because that
Okay.
puts us in a time limit.
I would agree with that.
And
Okay,
so,
then we'll
but
call
I
a city
would-
council meeting next week and see who can get there and we'll flesh this out. Okay, so Ann, you're ready. We'll get the information to you. Jan, what I heard from you would be, get me the information, okay? Joe Paul said he's ready to vote. Brian, what do you want in this work session?
I am truly ready to vote.
Okay, Diane, it looks like you're the one driving this train. What I heard from you, height, setback, and commercial. Sounds like when we get past this work session, I'm hearing at least 4 council members say they're ready to vote. Doesn't matter to me whether you're going to vote for it or against it, you're ready to vote.
May I just clarify that I went back and listened to these work sessions and 80 foot was never accepted. The actual wording was we would wait to see what the survey results were before we made the decision if 80 foot was acceptable to the citizens. And I believe that they spoke quite clearly. If you look at it, we have 36% of people that want 40 foot or less, 36%, and that's where the 72% comes. Only 29% of people said they were allowing it to be up to 80 foot.
Right.
72% of our citizens want 60 foot or less. And that's why I think it's so important for us to address it.
72% of 814.
Well, let me tell you, that is statistically as significant as we can get. This is the best town hall. We couldn't have town hall meetings. So we were able to do this as a survey. And if we're going to spend that kind of money, then I believe we need to at least take the time to address it and incorporate it.
The other problem with the survey is
it would
it
be
did not tell-
disrespectful not to do that.
the survey did not tell people where those buildings would be, which makes a big difference. People say, I've talked to said, put it next to the freeway. I don't care how high you go because I'm not going to see it from my backyard.
So Joe, where
That's
does it say, Joe, I'm going to ask you a question, please. Where does it say in the current coordinate, in the current zone, the current proposal, that we can only have 80 foot next to the freeway? I don't see that. I see that it's 80 foot from 1900 to the freeway, but not just next to the freeway. Where does it say what you're saying?
It doesn't. To me, east of 1900 is up against the freeway. Most of that corridor is pressing up against the freeway where they have the ability to move.
So let me see if I understand what we're saying here. To me, it sounds like you're basically saying is if I can get everywhere along that entire corridor in that district, go 60 feet, which is exactly where it sits today, everybody will be happy. Is that right?
That's
Is that right?
a start. Absolutely, let's start.
Okay, so everybody,
No.
let's see if we can cut to the chase. It's already 60 feet. And all of this concern about, say, going up to 60 or 80 feet, I mean, we've had 60 feet for 25 years.
But we
Show
haven't
me-
allowed them to put residential within that 60 feet.
They
Is that
could-
correct?
Well, no one's proposed it, but anybody
But
could
we
have
haven't
proposed.
ever allowed that because that's what our developers are telling us that they would make it more acceptable with them. Is if they could put above the street level, if they
Yeah.
could put residential. And we've never had that.
Nobody has come into Roy City and asked for a zoning change to do that I'm aware of, Jan.
But
So have they come in and asked for 80 foot?
They've never asked for anything. We could allow it up to 60 feet, but nobody has come into Roy City that I'm aware of and petitioned the city council that says, I'd like to do a zone change downtown and put a mixed use or a residential complex in our downtown. Nobody.
So,
This
but if
only-
we are putting mixed use,
Well,
what would be the problem of going with what the survey
Because the
indicated they wanted?
let's go back to what the survey said. So let's make sure Diane is reading what it says, okay, before she basically makes a statement. Option one, I'm not going to do option one. I'm going to turn to the data. Here's what it said.
Can we do this in the work session, Mayor?
But Randy Sant is on here. Has Woodbury proposed 80 feet of housing?
Well, hey, wait a minute. I don't want to get this specific because we've got a couple of developers interested in doing work in Roy City.
Right. I
So
think
my
we.
point would be is I don't want to single out one particular company.
But
or
I didn't
another.
know if anybody had proposed 80 feet.
Well, I don't even know if they're even going to build to 80 feet. Here's
Right.
my point to you. We have had an ordinance for at least 25 years to put a 60-foot building anywhere along that front. Show me anywhere in Roy City where there's a 60-foot building over the last 25 years.
Well,
Right.
Roy, it sounds like Mayor, 60 foot's gonna be fine. I don't think we need to go higher. If nobody wants 60.
Well, that's
foot,
obviously your
go there.
opinion, but let's just ask
You know
the
what?
question.
I'm going to make a motion right now that we push this off to the work session because
Right.
it's toxic.
Okay,
I agree.
Fair enough.
That's a great idea.
okay.
I agree. Thank you.
We now
very
have
much.
your
Second
input.
that
We're going to cover three things. We'll make sure we don't have to vote on this. We'll cover the three things you asked. Height. We'll cover the issue dealing with setbacks, and we're going to cover the issue dealing with commercial property. Those are the three issues. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
come prepared with that information. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, we do have one last ordinance that needs to be addressed, and that is the ordinance, I think the number is
21
ordinance 20-5. So Andy, I believe you're going to talk this one. Thank you.
I am, Mayor. Thanks. Before you tonight, you have ordinance 21-5. And what we're doing with this, we're just revising and updating our business and licensing regulations. So it needed a little bit of cleanup, hadn't been taken care of for a while. I was especially concerned about how we handled our appeals process with that too. And I thought we needed to change that over to how we've handled it with several other areas in the city where we actually have the appeal, where we can have a hearing officer to handle these things. And in the way the code was written right now, it allowed for the city council to actually act somewhat like a jury or a judge. And I don't think any of us would want to be in that situation, especially we don't have the training or the background in that, and there's a lot of legal issues. So typically what happens is a hearing officer is appointed. I've done this for Ogden City where they had a business licensing issue and they hired me out to decide that. You get an independent person from outside of the city rather than you're having to make decisions against different people that you may know or may be in the city. So we've done that with some other areas in the city. So I want to make sure that we have that taken care of here. So that was one of my primary motivating factors with it, but I'll go over a little bit. I looked in the definitions. There were some that really didn't even need to be in there. There was something that needed to be more. We had to deal with who a person is and list all those definitions because there were quite a few more things than what we currently had listed. We don't really need to define the Roy City Fire Department or the Ogden Police Department. We do the Weber County Health Department. So there were just some cleanup cleanup like that. I want to make things a little more clear on the procedure for getting a business license. If you were someone who was applying, how that works, how a denial comes up, what your appeal time is. So I put all that in there. I thought we needed to make it clear, though, that inspections were a prerequisite to getting a license. So I wanted that spelled out. And I think I did spell that out, but it didn't necessarily say that before. The time when the licenses expire, you say the first day of the next year. So what, was that in the morning or was it the evening of that? So I put something to the effect, it's the end of the day of the last day of the year. So I think that clarifies that too, or at the end of the day of the last day of the year. We had to deal with interstate commerce, so I changed that, so that would make some sense. The exemptions needed to be updated, so I made sure that we listed some of the things that weren't in there before. Matt made a great suggestion that one of the reasons we could deny a license or even suspend a license is that they fail to report their sales tax documentation to the state tax commission. I thought that was really a significant, important thing that we had in there. And in the different cities I looked at, nobody else really had anything like that. So I thought that was really good, a good point that Matt brought up. So that's what I've got with the general business license ordinance. I sent out copies of everything where I'd highlighted the things that I'd added or deleted, just so that you could see, because it's kind of hard to tell in that final document that you have. Right. With the solicitation part, it's because there's constitutional issues you're dealing with. In certain circumstances, there might be religious solicitation or from organizations. There's free speech issues. So we kind of had to take that out of there. And there's a preamble that gives the purposes behind the solicitation ordinance. We've done that too when you look at our sexually oriented business licensing. It's in a separate chapter all by itself. So that's why it has to be in there. And there's the commerce clause comes into place here too. So you have different things working that make it so we have to keep that in a bit of a separate section. Although the appeals process, I've referred that back to what we have in our business licensing. So it's really the same kind of appeals process. It's pretty standard what we're doing here. And when you're looking at a solicitation ordinance, anyway, typically you have, you're basically saying, hey, if you're going to be involved in soliciting business or whatever in the city, you have to have a license and pay a fee. But then you make certain exceptions when we're dealing with religious or political speech. They don't have to pay that fee and they don't have to get a license either. So you have, normally everybody has to, but then you have exceptions for certain areas. Now, what it does is if a person though doesn't want any solicitation, you put a no solicitation sign there at your house, and whether you're exempt or not as a business or a religious organization or whatever, if it says no solicitation, you don't knock on that door. That ends it there. If you did get permission to come in before, there's also a provision that says the people can say, okay, I've had enough, listen long enough, you'll have to leave. And in those situations, you know, it can be a trespass. So that's kind of what's there. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Before approval though, there is one part that I want to delete that I added into the regular business license ordinance. So I think it's 3-1-12-1. And the last line I wanted to delete there. It mentioned that if you're exempt, even though you don't have to pay a fee, you have to put an application in and register. You don't. I did more checking on that and you don't have to do that either. So.
Hey, let me ask a couple of questions, Andy, just make sure I got this clarification. Who sets the variable fees outlined in 3-1-10?
Yeah, those have been set for quite a while and typically they're set by the council. So a council has approved those fees in the past.
Would the council want to see what those fees are? Specifically, Brian, one of those fees are if they put a gambling device in Roy City, they have to pay a fee for every gambling device.
Is that legal in the state?
It's in the
Yes.
ordinance.
Can we, can we do that? I mean,
Yes.
and
Yes.
It's in
we've-
the
we've approved
ordinance.
it in the past. And with our fees, one of the things that I took out of here, I should say, is it used to say that fees can be used for revenue, and they can't be. There has to be a justification. Those fees have to be approximately what the actual costs are. So about 11 years ago, we had a study done, and that's how those business license fees were arrived at. And what we're doing right now, I've made contact with one place. I'm waiting to hear back from them. In fact, they're the same people that did the license fee study for us before. I'm waiting to see what they're thinking, but we would still probably have to go outside, but I want to see what their costs are. And then we'd see if some others might be available. We go through the regular business, our selection process. So.
Well, let's do this. Obviously, we've caught all you council members cold on what this fee is. Matt, how about taking an action? Let's send out to the council what those fees are. It should break them out according to what's in 3-1-10. But gambling devices, gambling fees are in there. And you as a council set that fee rate. So take a look at it. If the council needs to update those fees, then let's have a conversation about that. Matt, would you go ahead and do that? Okay, last question, Andy.
So Mayor, do you want us to have a study? Because that study is going to have to justify what the fees are.
Maybe it would be best if they at least see what the fees are. And if they seem to say, hey, that's okay, that seems to be fair, then we'll leave it as is. But if the council
you don't want to change the business ordinance now and then do the fees at a different time? Because we do have an
Yeah, I'd like to set this ordinance, and I'm going to take a motion to approve this ordinance as written. But I didn't see anywhere in this ordinance to set the fee rates. Those fee rates are somewhere else.
Well, right now, each department has their own fees. We do have an ordinance already ready to go that has the fee schedule, a consolidated fee schedule.
Where's
so
that?
That's ready to go, but the only thing is I can't change the amounts in there until we have a study done.
Okay.
So my proposal, I think you should adopt this as it is. It doesn't deal anything with the fees. The fees remain exactly what they are right now. But this takes care of a lot of the other areas where we might have some problems.
Okay.
And then when we come back with that fee study, which I hope won't take too long, then we can adopt a consolidated fee schedule that will have whatever changes they recommend. Because we are going to have to go with what they recommend. We can't just on our own go, hey, I think we should charge a certain amount. We have to be able to justify that. And we justify that by having a study that does that. Because I don't think any of us, I mean, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what a certain fee should be.
Yeah, and the fact that I didn't see it in the packet only suggests I thought it was a separate issue. But let's go for the vote to see if they'll adopt it as is, and then do your fee study. And then from that, if there's going to be a changes, then the council can take the study and be able to make a decision whether we adjust the fees or not based on the study.
Yeah, that sounds good.
One last question.
I'll make a motion.
I got one more question, Jan, really quick.
Sorry.
We called out the big significant change in this is the fact is that we moved it from where the council sits in judgment for an appeal, and we brought a hearing officer. Everybody understand that? Okay. Who pays, Andy, who pays for the hearing officer?
The city would pay for the hearing officer. We've done that with our Board of Adjustments too. Instead of having a separate board, we did it with our Employees Appeal Board. What we noticed with that, you'd have a couple of council members, you'd have some employees. Nobody really understood how that process worked. So I've done the same thing for other cities. I've sat in on their civil service commission in the past and represented them, but everybody's moving away from civil service commissions. They're moving away from employee appeals board, but typically you like to bring in somebody who has an expertise in that area. And it's really difficult. We had a case several years ago that dealt with the bar, and we were going to try to shut them down because we thought there were some violations. So that would have been all over the place on TV, and all the council members at that time would have been
up there, and there would have been a big crowd, and then they would have had to make a decision based on what was presented in front of them. I just much rather see things handled by a hearing officer who has expertise in that area, and if they don't like what that hearing officer says, then they can appeal it up to the courts. But I think it makes for a better case than having 5 council members trying to make findings of facts and conclusions of law that then can be appealed, and getting them to all agree. So I don't think that any of you would want to be involved in that kind of process.
Yeah, the reason why I brought the question up is to make sure you understand is that by doing this, you basically will hire, if there is ever an appeal, you hire the city hires the hearing officer. That really was the only reason for the question.
And I should say it sends it to the city manager is who the appeal goes to.
Right.
And if the city manager can handle it on their own if they want to, but can hire, we can bring in a hearing officer instead. So
that's the Board of Adjustments. We went through that whole thing. We changed about 4 years ago, all of that out of the zoning ordinance. So all that's been adjusted. We have hearing officers in most everything we have now. It's not totally removed, but it's in a lot of the places been fixed. So my point to the question was, when you approve this, just recognize the fact is by moving it to a hearing officer, then if there's a hearing officer that's needed, the city pays for that. That was not clearly defined in the document, but I wanted to make sure you understood that.
There may be a cost involved.
Yeah, and it won't be a lot. And there's not that many appeals that have to go to that level, but just recognize the fact is that by approving this, you recognize the city would have to hire that hearing officer. Are we okay with that?
And I'd say so far with the hearing officer changes that we've made in other ordinances, we have yet to bring anybody in. So, and I've been at Roy almost 20 years now, and we haven't had one business license appeal yet. But I think we got pretty close here in December. So, and luckily it died. But so I would say that if you make a motion to approve, have that motion to approve with a deletion of section 3-1-12, parentheses 1, the last line of that.
Okay, so do I have a motion then to approve ordinance 21-5 to repeal the chapter 3, title 3, chapter 1, and reenact the new and updated title 3, chapter 1 in the Roy Code, also enacting a new section, chapter 10, title 3 regarding residential solicitation, and providing an effective date with the removal of the last sentence on, give that to
3-1-12, parentheses 1.
There you go. Okay, do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Jan, I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I got
2
Ann
seconds.
seconded. This is a roll call vote. Morgan?
Going once, going twice.
Morgan went out to eat.
Go ahead, Morgan.
She has left the building.
Can you do the roll call vote?
I can't.
It keeps coming on and off. I think she might be having some trouble getting, because
I can see her mute coming on and off.
Yeah.
Can anyone else take it but her, or just her?
Yeah, someone else could do it. Let's see if she can work it.
Make Matt do it.
You're the follow-up, Matt.
Okay.
She'll probably send us a message in just a second, I would guess.
Yeah.
Morgan, if you can hear us, send us a text.
Should I just call it Andy?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Councilmember Wilson,
Aye.
Councilmember Saxton,
Aye.
Councilmember Burrell,
Aye.
Councilmember Paul,
Aye.
Councilmember Jackson.
Aye.
Okay. That's unanimous. Thank you. Let's go to public comments.
And I just got a text from Morgan. She's been talking the whole time, so.
Okay. Morgan told me there was nobody wanting to come into public comments, so we'll go ahead and no public comments.
No, I do not believe so. I have
Okay.
access to the email as well, and I haven't seen any come in.
Yeah, and she sent me an email indicating she had nobody registered about 10 minutes before the meeting, so I'm going to assume not. Matt, City Manager, report.
So I actually just have one thing tonight, something that you already are aware of, but we did send out the bulk of the donations last week for the CARES Act funding. Just wanted to let everybody know that hasn't heard anything from it, that people were highly appreciative of it. They were very grateful when we came and dropped that stuff off. So they were.
Maybe you need to help us with the amount. There was little over $2 million given to Roy City. 800,000 the council approved to pay for salaries on the public safety. So best guess, how much did we donate to Roy City?
During the second allotment, there was about $100,000 that we allotted to it. We had a lot of difficulties finding areas that we could actually purchase things and get things in bulk. And like the hand sanitizer, things like that, when people started getting that, I didn't feel that it was very useful. We talked about plexiglass, things like that, but we didn't know how we could broadcast that out. So the city has had these electrostatic guns that has become very useful for us because of the time it takes an employee to clean areas. I thought it would be wise to give those to the schools, and some of the schools already had those, but needed more for different programs that they offer and things. So they were just very, very glad to get those in.
So you gave all to schools? Is that where the donation was?
Schools, we're looking at a couple other different agencies to try to reach out to some of those, and we'll contact you again when I set up an appointment to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, and by the way, council, the federal law states that we have to do an audit. I imagine we'll call an audit, bring a contractor in to conduct that audit, and then the audit committee will basically hear the results of that. We'll present that back to the council as a whole. Okay, any council, do you have any questions or anything you want to bring up?
I would just like to say, I have really appreciated the work sessions that we've had. I think that format has been excellent. And I hope that we'll be able to continue that in future for other topics that come up, because I do believe that's been a very helpful format for us to have and do kind of on a routine basis. So thank you everyone for participating in that.
Anything else we want to bring up? Okay, let me just go through a few things. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Just really quick, thanks for the support on the city buffet. They are constantly busy. And so anyway, but thanks for coming out to the ribbon cutting. Thanks, Mayor, for coming out. Anyway, I drive by it almost daily, and it's busy. I mean, that parking lot is packed.
I've eaten there 3 times and I'll second that motion.
Thank you.
I've ate there once.
Okay, just a couple of things, Matt. We tabled a community development block grant. That was tabled back on 19th of January. Would you check and see if the city is going to reintroduce that grant plan to the council? And I mean, I got a whole list of things. I'm not going to bore you with all these. Just pick out the big ones. There have been, council, I tried to route some information dealing with the dumpster program. Matt and I talked about that. He's going to get with Ross, and he's going to come to the council in terms of what do we do about the dumpster program, dropping those off to communities that's got 10 or more people want to contribute. One of the requests came in from an area in your area, Brian. They'd like to put one in a neighborhood, and they'd like to go through all the houses in there and just simply collect all their junk going into the spring. So council will need to make a decision. Matt will tell you that the water, stormwater policies have been strengthened. If we put a dumpster out there, we're going to have to put a lid on it. That's the new policy. And we do not have any of those that we typically have dropped off that we have lids on. So we need to have a serious conversation. They'll address the cost, and then we can kind of decide what the council would like to do about that. And Ann, I believe you're in the beautification committee. Is it you?
Yeah,
This is going to be a beautification committee discussion because we need to decide what we're going to do about community beautification as a result if we decide to lose the dumpster program in Roy City. So we got some conversation we've got to have.
well, yeah, I know Glenda Moore brought up the voucher program that we still needed.
They're ready to do that. Matt will bring that to you probably in one of the next couple of meetings. And then you'll need to finalize that. But yeah, that's still alive and well. And that'll be remember, that's only going to go to a certain dollar limit. But maybe for those people who benefit from it the most, they'll take advantage of it. So yeah, that'll be a
We're
good
still going to have in April where they can go down to the city public works, right? And dump for a couple weeks like we do in the fall.
Yes.
Still going to have that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not, the problem is not necessarily the dumpsters inside of the public works facility. The problem is the dumpsters that we drop on the street in the morning at 8 o'clock on Saturday mornings, and we pick them up at 4 o'clock that day.
Right.
That is completely changed, and we need to figure out the road ahead on that. Okay. Okay, that's all I got. Anything
I
else?
can answer some of those questions. So the big difference between the public works and the roads is the public works has the ability to have that go down into the sewer if it has the leakage from rain and things. And so that's the biggest variation there. As far as the block grant, Mayor, the reason why that was tabled is we didn't get the notification out for the public hearing in time. That study that we've done goes for 3 years. And so we're going to bring that up next year to put into the grant next year. And so.
So we're not going to be able to put one in this year?
No, we will not be able to put one in this year.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yes.
Okay.
The timing, what happened is the timing changed for the qualifications that they said that you had it. We advertised in the newspaper. It also required you to put it on the website now, and that was not it. So.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, that would have been a good program. I think Travis, his team probably takes advantage of that more than most. So. Okay.
The block grant was actually CDBG money that does roads and water lines.
Does it help on roads too? Okay. Okay. Anything else, council? Anything else you want to bring up? Okay. With that, then, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Joe, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Jan, I got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. Y'all have a good day
Bye.
now.
Thank you.
Thank you.